So Jay, you are doing Gilgamesh. Is Gilgamesh? Gilgamesh?
Gilgamesh, yes.
Gilgamesh. Yeah. So
Gilgamesh, yes.
you're coming to do Gilgamesh
G
on
Giggle
Wednesday.
would be a kid's version entirely, just Gilgamesh, but
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes.
Well, I think I'd like to hear Gilgamesh as well.
Yes, me too. Mhm.
Wednesday, the 6th of November from 7 till 8, you're going to be doing performing. So tell us a little bit about the show.
Well, Gilgamesh is a beautiful epic. One of the oldest stories we know of comes from Mesopotamia. It's about 5,000 BCE or so, roughly. It's quite old. So, and it's an epic story involving a king who is a dictator who is becomes wise. Through the intervention of a wild man, and it involves the cutting down of a sacred forest as well, and the devastation that ensues from that, and a voyage to the edge of the world to solve the problem of death. So, all of that in an epic. That's the very brief summary.
Of
But it's a
course.
magnificent story which speaks directly to a lot of our concerns right now in the modern world.
Yeah, absolutely. What is that what drew you to this story in particular?
Well, that's one of the things, absolutely. I was seeking a large story. Like many storytellers, I began with fairy tales and folk tales, with children, telling them to children. But I sought something a little bigger, a little larger. And there are many wonderful epics in the world, and I now tell several of them. But Gilgamesh is a good one to start with because it's not so gigantic. And yes, the modern concerns of it did draw me in. I was working in Yosemite National Park as a ranger, actually, and
Wow.
I was frequently around the sequoia trees, these just gigantic trees that are, 2,000 years old, So when I read the Epic of Gilgamesh and read about this sacred forest of trees, which had never been cut down before in the story, and the king, Gilgamesh, seeks to cut them down to bring wood to his city because his city is a desert city of stone and of sand and of many gardens, but they do not have large trees. So he and the wild man, Enkidu, go to cut down these trees and to kill the sacred guardian of the forest. So I heard that, and here I'm reading this, and I'm speaking to visitors to the park about how the sequoia trees were first discovered, so to speak, by European Americans, and then promptly cut down. Like one of the first things they did was we've got to cut this down. In fact, they stripped the bark from one tree and sent it to the Crystal Palace in London to be seen because the idea was no one would believe this. These trees are so big, no one could possibly believe this. So I would
Wow.
be standing there in the grove of gigantic sequoia trees, some of them, 15 feet in diameter or so. And this story really resonated with me, and I decided to tell it.
I love that. Absolutely fascinating. I had no idea that they sent the bark to Crystal Palace. So that's intriguing. Yes, thank you. So how did you begin your career as performance storyteller?
Well, like a lot of, perhaps like others, it was an option that was always there, but I wasn't quite aware of it. I hardly knew it was something you could do with your life, actually. But I spent many years, playing music when I first was in my 20s, and then decided to become a poet, and published 3 books with small presses and gave many poetry readings. And storytelling was around, and I was lucky enough to hear a few other storytellers such as Martin Shaw or Gioia Timpanelli, just fantastic storytellers. But I never really thought of it as my thing.
Mm,
But at a certain point, once I had a family, poetry became a business of the mail and the page. I was rarely reading my poems because I was busy raising a family. And
mm.
I hungered for performance and for really embodying these things. And suddenly I was like, wow, storytelling is a thing you can do as an adult. And it can connect you to the future, the past, to the sacred, and to the earth and to other people in just a marvelous way.
Yeah.
Um, that's the short answer.
Yeah, no, lovely. I like that, how the connection for all those things. Would you say then you are a born storyteller, a natural innate storyteller?
Oh gosh, oh gosh. Well, to do that is to like place myself separate from other humans, when in fact, storytelling is something all of us do quite easily. I would say we
Yeah.
are all born storytellers. If I ask someone, how you spent your summer, or when have you ever broken a bone, you will receive a story. And it will not be a memorized text, Well, Jay, in fact, I broke my leg on my it will be a spontaneously spoken story, which will be different every time it is told, slightly. So I would say I've been lucky to foster some of the qualities that a storyteller needs, such as facility with language, and music is helpful, of course. But all of us have those capabilities and capacities. And unfortunately, with film is lovely, but there's so much film around, and other sources of story. Few of us cultivate our own powers of imagination and expression.
That's an interesting point. Would you say film is killing the innate storyteller in us, or in many of us?
Well, that's a strong way to put it, but it might be true. I mean, I grew up, like many of us, I love film as a kid. Wow, for me now, I'll just say this, as a storyteller, films are getting more and more disappointing because, like, for example, I tell the Odyssey, and if I tell the whole story, it's probably 6 hours long, and I never tell it all at once, but I tell it in episodes, And so to stand in that story as a performer, and to really stand on the beach with there's Odysseus, there's Calypso, there's Odysseus weeping as he looks out at the sea, remembering his home. I get to really stand inside that story, and it's always fresh, and the language is always slightly different. So to compare that with the experience of seeing a marvelous creation on a screen for 2 hours is just a very different thing. It makes me passive. It makes me a watcher of a beautiful spectacle, which much talent and creativity goes into. But tell a story is really to be inside it, and so I would say that's an experience I wish more people could have. And if so, I think they would realize the power of their own imaginations. So I would say yes, film does have a yeah, has a negative impact on our own. It takes that power away from us in a way.
Yeah, I really like that. To tell a story is to be in the story. What do you think could be done to kind of develop the innate storytellers and create more storytellers?
Well, that's a great question. I think inspiring everyone, children as well as adults, by getting them to see stories performed at places like the marvelous Yorkshire Festival, So that's key. Now, the thing about a film is it's so convenient. We all have access to screens, and it's right there. And you're like, oh, here's the Odyssey. It's on my phone, So that's the reason film is so easily in our lives. But for myself, speaking as someone here in Ithaca, New York, in the modern world, as all of us are, I would love there to be more venues, for example, like a great venue where adults could go and hear stories regularly. I perform in a theater here quite often, and I've had success. I'm gaining success as the years go by with more and more adults. So I think really just seeing it for yourself and being like, wow, this can happen, because I think for most of us alive now, seeing an adult tell a story to others, in this way is unfortunately a kind of rare experience. So,
Mm.
yeah, the more we can share that, the better.
Yes, no, I agree. We need to have more storytelling venues, and make it more of a community thing. Have small storytelling events for small communities, and larger ones for bigger communities. Um, so you run, am I right in thinking or saying that you run the Crane Bag podcast? Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Can you
That's
tell
been
us about that podcast and how you use that platform to bring your myths to your listeners, or your myths alive to your listeners?
Yeah. Well, I've run this podcast for years, and it's been a great way to really to work on certain stories and get them down exactly as I want them to be. It's a little selfish, perhaps, you know. I mean, an audience is wonderful because you speak to the audience and the story changes in response to what the audience wants, who is in the audience, you know. If it's children, you change the story. If it's adults, you change the story. If it's raining, you might change the story. If people are getting bored, you change the story. So all of that is wonderful, and I prize that dialogue. I love it. But a recording, well, then you can tell it exactly as you see fit, perhaps. I was reluctant to do that just because the moment is so important in storytelling and the presence. You know, I mean, we're really doing energy work, working with the moment and working with the attention of an audience. So it can be a little like walking uphill to tell a story in my attic to a microphone, you know. But with the pandemic and other things, I just felt like I had to get these stories out there. And it has been a good way to go. You know, you want to bring stories to where people are and not where you want them to be, you know. So I would love to have a wonderful yurt at the end of my block with 50 people in it every weekend, you know. But I don't have that. But people have access to screens and to technology. So I, with some reluctance, I must say, I've done that podcast, but it's been really great, just to weave stories together over time and to present longer stories, such as the Odyssey or the Mahabharata, the Indian epic, through that medium.
Is it always retellings that you like to do, or do you like to write your own stories?
I, well, as a poet, you know, I was a poet for years, and you're just there with a blank page. And in some ways, I still am a poet. I just don't use the page as much. So you're there with a blank page, and you can do whatever you want. You know, you can talk about, you know, the dog you had when you were 5 years old. You know, you can talk about your trip to wherever. You can make up things. That is a marvelous freedom. But after a while, I began to seek something a little more with some really deep roots, you know, which isn't to say that poets can't access those roots,
Mm.
especially when they're inspired. I mean, that's wonderful. But there's something about a traditional story which has been carried in the voices of men and women for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You're really entering this chorus of voices, and it's far from being sort of limiting. I found it very liberating. So, yes, I don't make up the stories. But of course, there's some fuzzy ground here, right? Because often the stories aren't that clear, you know. Persephone, for example, goes to the underworld. Hermes goes to get her back once Zeus has decided, oh, we've had too much winter, the earth is going to die, she's got to come back. Well, how the storyteller chooses to do that, to play that out, is entirely up to the storyteller. You are at one time the actor, the screenwriter, the set designer, and the director of that scene, you know. We know she eats the seeds of a pomegranate, you know. There's slightly different versions in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, for example, or in you know, Ovid as well. Different versions. So you get to choose how you do that. Does Hermes reach out for her hand and say, "Come, my child"? Does he do that? Is she sick of being down there? Does she run to him? You can design that scene as you wish. So I tell stories that are traditional stories, but I, of course, interpret them in my own way.
Wonderful. I love that. So it's a traditional story told with the flavor of Jay.
I suppose so. Absolutely. Yes.
In a time where digital content is so dominant, why do you think that live storytelling is still important?
Well, as I've said, kind of, it's that presence, you know. Our attention is for sale, as we all know, right? What we attend to is sought after by the corporations. So live storytelling, you're all attending to a moment and you're connecting with each other. It's just a fantastic way of uniting, you know. The print has this way of isolating people. I mean, we love print. My house is filled with books. I love books, right? But our houses are designed basically in the modern world for to have spaces in them where we all go off and can read, you know, alone, which is a marvelous thing, of course. But oral storytelling Structures built to support that are like a yurt or a teepee, a Celtic roundhouse. All these structures are built to get a lot of people in a room so they can all hear the story and they can all be united in that moment. It's just fantastic the level of attention you get. And they are all, again, they're all creating the story themselves. It's a co-creation, right? If I say there's a green table and there's an old man at the table and a little dog and a little girl comes running in, we all see that scene in our own way. And that is a marvelous thing. It makes it very vivid. And it gives us control, to some extent. A film just sort of happens to you, and there's nothing you can do except close your eyes. I watched old Doctor Who episodes as a kid with my hands. I didn't see most of them because my hand was up if I was 6 years old or wherever. But a story, if there's a monster in a story, everyone will see the monster they're capable of seeing, and it'll be based on their imagination. So for that reason, storytelling works very well and gives us something we don't get through the normal channels these days.
Oh, I like that. It's a collective contribution. And it becomes alive to each individual audience member. I really like that. Thank you. What universal themes in Gilgamesh do you believe are most crucial for sorry, I'll start that again. Get my teeth back in. What universal themes in Gilgamesh do you believe are most crucial for contemporary audiences to explore?
Well, gosh, I mean, that's a great question, Lynn. But I mean, so you look at Gilgamesh, it's pretty much like looking at the headlines in the paper, honestly. I mean, we have a cruel dictator who oppresses the people. We have a forest that is destroyed, and the civilization suffers the consequences of that. We have a quest to put an end to death, so no one ever has to die. I mean, all of those headlines are right there, whether we're talking, I mean, political or not, Mr. Putin, Mr. Trump, and it's a story of a cruel dictator who becomes wise through suffering and sorrow. And so that's a beautiful story. So those themes, I think, speak directly to us. How do we deal with the bullies in our lives? The bullies which we, in fact, can become if we are not careful, if we are not mindful of our own actions in this world. This story explores how it may happen that a person who is cruel to others and glorying in their power begins to realize that life has meaning for everyone and that life is precious and that they should be kind, perhaps more than they are cruel. That's just one of the many themes. And then, of course, particularly with the pandemic, I mean, it's been so few years now, but the urge to live without death, and to fight death
Yeah.
as opposed to accepting it, that's very much in our culture today as well. So it's all there in those images. It's like it's a meditation. These stories are meditations on these themes through the power of images.
Do you think then these political themes and issues have been problems for millennia, not just centuries, not just decades? Because if a story that contains those themes that we can relate to nowadays in our everyday life and our political world, um, do you think then that those themes have continued throughout time? And if so, if how can the power of story now help to change those political themes and the world that we live in?
Yeah, that's a good question. A good question. Well, who can say what their frame of mind was 5,000 years ago? But it seems to me that civilization, so-called, was at its beginnings in a way, and people were questioning, is a city with a strong ruler really a good idea? And this is a story which which wrestles with that question. Should we have a king with this much power? Is it a good thing? Later stories don't always question that so much, but this story is like, well, is it a good idea? Because things can get out of hand. So has it been a perennial thing to meditate on? Well, I think probably so. We humans have power individually, and then we give specific individuals larger power, and is that a good thing? How much do we want to give that power away? How much is it our power as well? So many stories, I mean, fairy tales, of course, deal with this as well, especially with differences of class, the way someone of a lower social class will jump up into a higher strata of society. So many stories question this in certain ways. Gilgamesh does it in a particularly colorful and grandiose way, which I enjoy. So,
Brilliant, great answer. What do you hope that Yorkshire Festival of, sorry, what do you hope that the Yorkshire Festival of Story audience members take away from your event?
hmm, I hope they remember the story. I hope they remember the story. It's not like there's a moral that I want to convey. It's not like the story is a code for some other message, like, be nice to your neighbor or something. It's more complex than that. I hope they come away with the images of the story, because those images are dense with information, in our modern way of thinking. It's a way of having a very concentrated amount of insight in an image. So if they can remember, Gilgamesh and Enkidu striding into the forest, if they can remember that tree falling, if they can remember the gods conferring in a cloud of ash at the edge of the universe, deciding what should be done with the humans, that would be a victory. And perhaps they might choose to tell such a story. It is easier than most people think, and it is within our powers to do this. Obviously, I am but one of many talented storytellers today, and many of those people are all around the world. So it's a thing all of us can do. So I would hope that people take away the story themselves, and maybe in some moment in their lives they see an image of that story, and they're like, ah, this story lives for me. Because in many ways we are inside this story, whether we know it or not.
That makes me think of the Never-Ending Story, the book and the film, actually.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah, where the power of our attention to the story makes it live.
Yeah, absolutely. I do love that. I'm gonna do like a 60 second, I'm gonna put a timer on now. And I'm gonna do a 60 second fire question round, if you like.
All
Um
right.
for a bit of fun. So I'll just fire some questions at you, but it'll be like I won't tell you what the question will be, but it'll
Okay.
just be for 60 seconds. So don't think too much. Just give me a one word, one, two, three, maybe four word answer,
All
and
right.
we'll go from there. So I'll pop the timer on. If you had a super fat power, what would it be and why?
If I had a superpower,
Hmm.
my superpower would be to remain calm under all situations.
Great. Who is your favorite character out of any story?
Out of any story, gosh, Ganesha, the trickster god.
If you were to have dinner with any character from any story, who would it be?
Odysseus for sure.
What book are you currently reading?
I'm actually reading The Singer of Tales. It's about Yugoslavian bards in the 30s who told stories of 2 to 3 hours in length.
If you were to be interviewed by any famous storyteller or any famous actor or any famous person in your industry, who would it be?
Oh gosh. Well, Scheherazade, of 1001 Nights, but I'd have questions for her. But if I would be honored to be interviewed by her.
So our time have gone off. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Just like to, it's always fun to do those random quick
Yeah.
ones, but I like to keep the interview questions quite small, and I always add a few in because I found in previous years people don't tend to watch 1 hour interviews anymore, but they like short, sharp, small ones so they can get a bit of a taste of what the event's going to be. So
Yeah.
thank you very much, Jay. I've really appreciated your time and chatting with you today, and I really can't wait for the event actually. So I'll be working on that one that day. I think I'm doing the chat moderation. Um,
Okay.
so I'm going to get to see
Cool.
much. Are you doing it live? I'm just going to stop
Yeah, I'm
this.
doing it